Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they are released. Today's film we're talking about is Argylle, which is directed by Matthew Vaughn and stars Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell and Henry Cavill. So the first, somewhat major release of 2024 is here with Argylle. A star-studded cast with, I mentioned a few there, but with so many names in this. It could be John Cena, Dua Lipa, Samuel L. Jackson, the list goes on. There is a large and very star-studded cast here. Add to that, you have Matthew Vaughn. Matthew Vaughn, a director who has done some things I did quite enjoy, and some things I wasn't too fussed on. Going through a lot of his directorial movies, or his directorial escapades, would be kind of good, okay, bad, is the variation of my feelings on Matthew Vaughn as a director. The really good, and I mean the really, really good, is The First Kingsman: The Secret Service, a movie that I truly, to this day, love. The second film, The Golden Circle, is fine, but not a film that I love in any way, and certainly couldn't hold a candle to the first film. And then you have The King's Man, the one with Ralph Fiennes, and the prequel set in wartime, and a movie that I was very, very disappointed in. I did not like that movie whatsoever. I was talking about it, was it this time last year? I think it was around this time last year we were talking about that movie. And it was very much a disappointment, sadly. But actually, it might have been the year before. I don't even know what year we're on. Anyway, but the point of that is, the Kingsman stuff was varying degrees of greatness. And very vastly varying degrees. Because the first Kingsman is really good. And truthfully, it was the first time I really took notice of Matthew Vaughn as a director. It was only after that I realised I had seen a few movies that he had done prior to that. Things like Layer Cake with Daniel Craig, which is a movie I enjoy but don't love. I think it's pretty good. And then Kick-Ass, which is one of the more fun, kind of break the mold of a superhero genre movies, which I did enjoy. And talking about superhero movies, he also did X-Men First Class, which is one of the better X-Men movies. I mean, it's not great, but it's one of the better ones by comparison to some of the real stinky ones. So that's my thoughts on Matthew Vaughn as a director. And I think when he has the real creative control, it can either go one of two ways. I think it either goes too far left field, it goes a little bit too far to the point where the audience just goes, this is beyond silly and stupid. And don't get me wrong, in Kingsman, that I love a lot, the first film, that film has a degree of realness. It has a degree of James Bond, it has a degree of also some comedic moments, but it has a bit of grounded reality. But then there is scenes that are a bit more fantastical, things like the church scene, things like the ending scene with a lot of colours and a lot of over-the-top fun. And I suppose that's a key word to kind of start talking and leading us on to talking about Argylle. Because if you've heard the early reactions to this movie, people have talked about Argylle and said it's a mess, and the story is so incoherent and such. It's convoluted for convoluted's sake, plot twists, and a movie that really doesn't have a through line, doesn't have a spine. It just seems to be this happens. So going into Argylle, I heard a little bit of the murmurs like that, and I kind of went in hoping. I didn't go in with expectation. I did. But I went in with expectation on the hope that this cannot be like The King's Man. It can be more like Kingsman: The Secret Service, the first film. It can be like Kick-Ass. It can be something that is okay. Well, clearly he's found his niche, and he's back doing his niche as a director. Because it's clear that the action scenes, which are probably the best part of all of Matthew Vaughn's films, the choreography, the kind of over-the-top set pieces of action are one of the most memorable and most enjoyable parts of this, no matter even in the good films or the stinky films. You know, I remember even in The King's Man, a movie that I did not like with Ralph Fiennes, there's a scene with Rasputin which is so over the top, but it sticks in my head, and I actually did quite enjoy that scene. I just didn't enjoy the movie. And leading this into Argylle, did I get what I wanted? Did I get a movie that I had hoped really was like a return to form and nearly like a new Kingsman that could build into a series or a spy series, or, you know, have that, recapture that same feeling I had when I seen the first Kingsman? In all honesty, the answer to that question is no. Argylle is not a great movie. It really isn't. It is a movie that, as mentioned there, as people have already critiqued it, I kind of agree. The movie itself is a mess. It has twists and turns for twists and turns' sake. It has a story that, no matter how many times it twists and turns and pulls rabbits out of hats and does things that kind of are supposed to subvert your expectation and change and divert, you know, the story from one vantage point to the next, no matter how many times it does that, there isn't too many parts of this whenever I really cared about what was going on, just on a story basis. I didn't really care for our leads too much. Now, that's not to say that performances were bad. I actually didn't think any performances in the movie were particularly bad at all. I actually thought everybody was doing a pretty good job with the dialogue they're given. And the dialogue, actually, I was quite disappointed in the dialogue, because a lot of it was just, and I've just said that, but I want to re-emphasize that point, that it was twists for twist's sake. There was not there really wasn't a coherent and clear story. It was just, fair enough, and don't get me wrong, movie twists, when done right, in any kind of movie, whether it's horror, whether it's comedy, whether it's action thriller, whether it's whatever, twists, you can have multiple twists. That isn't a hindrance on stories, and if done well, can be really, really effective. So I'm not saying for a minute that the twists are the reason. It's how they're carried out in this movie. And I actually felt a little bit, should I even say this when I'm talking about the movie? Because obviously twists gives away that there will be twists. But there's so many. And actually, even from the trailer, the twist that Argylle isn't Henry Cavill, it's the author, and that's Bryce Dallas Howard, and you learn that from the first trailer after watching about 10 seconds of it. That kind of sets the tone for the basis of this movie from start to finish. There's so much twists, there's so much narrative changes, and this character who isn't who you think they are, and this character who isn't who they think they are, and you kind of go through that the whole time, and no matter, even by the end, there is so many, you know, it's not like there's a few twists in maybe the first or second act, and then the third act really carries through. It's still doing the same crazy and wacky stuff it does early in the movie, later in the movie, and by that point, you're pretty sick of it. But that's my real negatives of Argylle out of the way, because that sounds like I'm really critiquing the movie. That's my biggest issue with it. But in truth, I didn't hate this movie at all. I actually weirdly enjoyed it. And this might be a bit different to the way I usually react to movies that are of this nature, because something I've seen recently, which is The Beekeeper, for example, with Jason Statham, that has more of a coherent story than this. It may be the most generic story, it may be a carbon copy of something like John Wick, but that movie, the problem with it, I didn't find as much fun and enjoyment in it, but I thought the story was better. And I think overall, I like the movie more as a movie, if you get what I mean. Argylle is a complete mess story-wise, but I would be lying if I didn't say I had fun with this movie. And fun is the optimum word, because that was something that was severely lacking from The King's Man, I felt. The King's Man had an okay story, and had okay action, pretty good actually. Pretty good action scenes, memorable scenes that are a bit over the top, and in some cases very over the top. And that seems to be a staple in all of these movies by this director. But something that I really found with this movie was, I found it quite funny. I found it quite comedic. I thought some of the beats were... There was good, hilarious moments kind of scattered throughout, and no character encapsulates that more in this film than Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell is so underrated. I he's an actor that I've grown to love more and more as time has went on. Performances years back in things like Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, things like Jojo Rabbit, but they were more kind of serious with a tinge of comedic effect roles. And I know Jojo Rabbit is more the comedic side of things, where Three Billboards be more, well, certainly more of a serious film. But he has that diversity of character and can bring that and still be himself in these movies. And he is the kind of heart and soul of Argylle. Because while Bryce Dallas Howard is pretty good, you know, she's not great. And I don't want to be too, I don't want to talk too badly about Bryce Dallas Howard, because I actually am a fan of hers, but actually mostly in a directorial role. I actually think her best performance is in Black Mirror, if you've seen her episode of that, which I think she can be a brilliant actress in certain scenarios, and I have no doubt of that whatsoever. But I do think she's better on the creative side of things. That's not to say that her performance is bad in any way. She isn't. She's obviously the kind of core of this film. She's a surrogate character into the spy world, and similar to Eggsy would have been in Kingsman, Taron Egerton's character. And that is all kind of fine. You know, but the story itself, there's nothing really to latch onto, as I mentioned. There's so much twists and turns that you just get a bit, okay, right, well, right, You've thrown me this way, you've thrown me that way. Okay, can we just kind of get back on the horse now, and can we finish this movie, and can we get to some kind of satisfying conclusion? However, all that being said, I don't want to go back into talking about the negatives, because that is the negatives, and that's why it's not going to get a very high score, but it's also not going to get too bad of a score. And the reason that is because there's a lot of scenes in here that are hilarious, they're over the top, they're visually stunning. There's a few later in the film in particular that are really, really memorable, and that will stick in the memory, because that's something that over time, and certainly doing this series, a lot of it comes down to, if there's movies that are not as good and maybe forgettable as a whole, and I probably would class Argylle in this category. I do think there's scenes in here that even if I was on YouTube watching old scenes from movies, there's a few in here I would rewatch. And that kind of is my indictment of Argylle as a whole, because there's scenes in here, and I think if this was more of a coherent story, more of a brilliantly crafted piece that has the hilarity, has the fun times, but also, and yes, it does have good action scenes. I suppose I should mention that too. The action scenes in here are pretty good. However, I will put a little bit of an asterisk beside that, saying there's a few of these that are big CGI set pieces with kind of cars going down hills, parachutes, etc. And the visual effects they're perfect, let's say, and I found them quite noticeable. If you look at any of the characters, whether it's Henry Cavill, whether it's Bryce Dallas Howard, whatever, if you look at their face in this, it's very clear, you know, you kind of get taken a little bit out of the movie in that regard, because these big budget, and I suppose you would class this as the first big budget film we've had release here this year, and for that to feel a little bit cheap on the visual effects side of things, certainly the big action set pieces as mentioned, that felt a little bit of it certainly wouldn't be Matthew Vaughn's best action outing in a while. And actually, I think I would say that the action in Kingsman, the Ray Fiennes one, is probably more akin to the first Kingsman, and even something like Kick-Ass, where the violence and the action feel more brutal. There is some good bits in this. There's good fun to be had with Argylle, but it's a film that, coming out of it, I went, well, I did quite enjoy that. But the more I've sat and thought about it, just, you know, on the build up to recording this, I kind of have soured it on it a little bit. Not to the point where I didn't like the movie, and I would think that everybody should go and make their own opinion, particularly if you did like any of the Kingsman movies. If you did like Kick-Ass, you did like Layer Cake, you did like anything that this director has done, you will get some enjoyment in some points. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who really enjoys this story being told. And there is kind of the touting of, do they continue this? Do they build it into a franchise? I don't know if that's concrete or not, but I think they're obviously going to lay the groundwork if that could be possible. And truthfully, I don't think it warrants it. Being honest, I don't think Argylle warrants a franchise. It doesn't warrant a trilogy or whatever the case may be. But overall, you know, I'm trying to be as fair as I can, because I didn't come out of this film going, oh, I hated that, or I thought it was so awful, or anything like that, because it couldn't be further from the truth. I did find enjoyment from it. I did have fun with it. Would I go and see it again? I don't know. If I seen it again, would I enjoy it less? Probably. Although, there is great scenes in here, and I will stand by that. There's great enjoyable scenes. Actually, in a very weird way, the last time I was on Initial Thoughts on the channel, we were talking about Napoleon. And Napoleon itself, in a very, very, very different movie. But hopefully you'll understand the point I'm making, which is, for Napoleon, the story being told was just uninteresting in between. But it has brilliant scenes. And in Napoleon, it had brilliant battle scenes. Really brilliant battle scenes. Argylle, in a very different way, has a similarly uninteresting story being told overall, but the scenes in the movie, there's about 4 or 5 scenes in this that are memorable, that are hilarious, that are enjoyable. Some are a little bit emotional, but not to the point where you really care for any of the characters. Really, only Sam Rockwell and Bryce Dallas Howard are the only 2 characters in this movie. Everybody else is kind of just like action figures in the background. But overall, Argylle is fun and fine, and a bit of a disappointment is probably how I could describe it best. Let's get to rating time. As you can see, IMDb is almost exactly where I'm at. Actually, it is exactly where I am, because Argylle for me is a 6 out of 10. Did I go into Argylle thinking it would be more than a 6 out of 10? Yeah. Did I think it would be more than a 7 or an 8 out of 10? No. I didn't expect much for this movie, truthfully. I know that after The Kingsman, I probably wasn't going to get something to the level of the first Kingsman movie from Matthew Vaughn again, especially in something so similar in genre, similar in style, similar in the spy comedy genre with action and things like that. There's stuff to enjoy here, but I think overall it will just go down as another swing and a miss for Matthew Vaughn, unfortunately. I had fun, but I didn't love it in any way. I liked the movie. I liked some of the scenes. I do think if I seen it again, as mentioned earlier, I think if I'd seen it for a second time or a third time, I think my viewing experience would probably go down on multiple viewings. But there is some parts that I did enjoy, and I would say there is enjoyment to be had here. And I do think people that are being very harsh on the movie, saying it's the worst movie of the year, it's the worst blockbuster they've seen in years, all this money pumped into something so much of a mess. It is a mess, story-wise, but I'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who doesn't find any enjoyment in this movie. Any kind of fun to be had here, because there is enjoyable parts. There really is. And we can be as critical as we like. And if we're talking just on movie making, and, you know, as a cinephile about, well, actually it should have been that, we could do that all day. If you take any part of this movie and try to deconstruct it, you could have a field day. You could pick apart any bit of logic from any character throughout this whole thing. There's so many inconsistencies, there's so many points that do not make sense if you stop to think about them for more than half a second. But those movies where you go in and switch your brain off and have some enjoyment of them, this is that. And I'll not remember Argylle probably this time next year. Because something, and I know I've mentioned this is a comparison a good lot of times, but The Kingsman with Ray Fiennes that I've mentioned, honestly, probably throughout this whole thing, I've probably talked about it more than I've talked about Argylle here. But the point with it was, I went into it going, Kingsman: The Secret Service was one of my favourite spy movies ever. Up there with my favourite of the James Bond movies. That was how much I really enjoyed that movie. The Golden Circle was fine, but a good bit of a letdown. But still, I would rewatch it and still enjoy good parts of that movie. and it was fine. The Kingsman, whereas where I went, oh jeez, the Kingsman series is really falling off a cliff here. And while Argylle obviously isn't Kingsman, it's the same director, it's a star-studded cast, and it's a similar kind of vibe to it, but it really falls under the same... if you give it the same scrutiny, it has the same problems. And that is kind of where I'm at with Argylle and this movie overall. Argylle is fun. Fun but forgettable, and is disappointing, but not anywhere near as bad as The Kingsman. There you go, there's the summary, and that's that. So yeah, that has been my thoughts for Argylle. The first movie, the first big release, in quotation marks, that we've had of 2024. Of course, there has been other reviews we've already started talking about on TikTok. If you want to go and follow me on there, I don't really plug it too much when I'm talking about the YouTube, or talking on YouTube, but that has been something that's been growing pretty well, and talking about films that I wouldn't class as massive releases, but there has been movies there that I've actually enjoyed more than movies I've talked about on Initial Thoughts. So if you are on TikTok as well and want to follow me over there, I'd appreciate so much. Also, a little bit of a plug, I'm also on Letterboxd now. If you want to hear my thoughts on any and all movies that have existed, I'm on there. And that's how we're starting 2024. However, it's up to you if you want to do any of that, or if you just want to listen to this video and I'll never see you again. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you do want to stick around, leave a like, let me know you enjoyed, subscribe for more like this, and if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love everyone.